The crinkle of cellophane wrapper on a fresh pack. The click of a Zippo lighter in a pub beer garden. The taste of a cigarette that's been part of British life for generations. We've ranked 20 of Britain's most famous cigarette brands from worst to best, and some of these will have you coughing in disbelief. Let's see if your old favourite made the top spot. Mayfair is the cigarette equivalent of White Lightning cider. Cheap, nasty, and only bought by people who are absolutely skint or desperate. Every corner shop had them behind the counter in those value packs that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never seen a cigarette before, and blokes bought them because they were literally the cheapest thing with nicotine in it. The smoke was harsh, the taste was like licking an ashtray, and the only reason anyone remembers them is because they were what you smoked when you'd run out of money 3 days before payday. Your mate's dad probably had a pack in his shirt pocket in the 90s, and you probably nicked one behind the bike sheds and regretted it immediately. Mayfair existed purely on price point. There was nothing aspirational, nothing enjoyable, just cheap tobacco wrapped in paper that got you through the day. They ranked bottom because even in the world of cigarettes there are standards, and Mayfair barely cleared them. Sovereign was another budget brand that appeared in the 80s when tobacco companies realised they could make even cheaper cigarettes than they already were. They came in those weird king-size packs that felt flimsy in your hand, and the cigarettes themselves were so loosely packed that half the tobacco would fall out before you'd even lit them. Blokes smoked Sovereign when they couldn't afford Embassy, and they smoked Embassy when they couldn't afford proper cigarettes. The taste was rough, the burn was uneven, and you'd get through a pack twice as fast because half of it ended up on your lap. They disappeared from most shops by the 2000s and nobody mourned their passing. Sovereign ranks here because it represents the absolute bottom of British tobacco, functional but utterly joyless. Consulate was marketed as menthol cigarettes for people who found normal cigarettes too harsh, which in practice meant they tasted like smoking a packet of extra strong mints through a straw. The ads showed people skiing and doing winter sports, trying to make menthol seem fresh and sophisticated, but really it was just masking how rough the tobacco was underneath. Your auntie probably smoked them in the 70s because she thought they were better for her throat, and she was absolutely wrong about that. The menthol kick was so strong, it made your eyes water, and after a few puffs you couldn't taste anything else for an hour. Menthol cigarettes got banned in 2020, and Consulate disappeared with them. They rank low because menthol cigarettes were always a bit suspect. If you're going to smoke, at least taste the tobacco rather than hiding behind mint flavouring. Park Drive was unfiltered cigarettes for hard men who thought filters were for softies, which meant every drag was like inhaling pure tar directly into your lungs. They came in those plain packets with no frills whatsoever, and your granddad probably smoked them while working down the pit or on a building site. They were strong, they were cheap, and they were absolutely lethal. Smoking Park Drive was like gargling with industrial solvent. Blokes who smoked them had yellow fingers, permanent coughs, and a misplaced sense of pride about choosing the harshest cigarettes available. They stopped making them in the 90s, probably because everyone who smoked them had already died. Park Drive ranks here because while there's something admirable about their no-nonsense approach, being deliberately horrible isn't actually a virtue. Number 6 was another working man's cigarette that prioritised cheapness over everything else, and blokes smoked them because they were marginally less rough than Park Drive, but still cost next to nothing. They came in red packs that looked almost identical to Marlboro if you squinted, which was probably the point. Aspiration on a budget. The taste was harsh but not unbearable, the smoke was thick, and you'd get through a pack a day without even thinking about it, because they were so cheap it didn't matter. Your dad probably smoked number 6 in the factory canteen during his tea break, and he'd have a roll-up if he ran out before knocking off time. They disappeared gradually as budget cigarettes got pushed out by bigger brands, and nowadays nobody remembers them except blokes of a certain age who will tell you they were better than anything you can buy now. They rank here because they were honest cigarettes for honest people. Nothing fancy, but they did the job. Dorchester was one of those mid-range cigarettes that tried to position itself as slightly classier than the budget brands without actually being premium. They had that distinctive blue and gold pack that looked vaguely sophisticated, and blokes who smoked them thought they were moving up in the world from number 6 or sovereign. The tobacco was smoother than the cheap stuff. The filters actually filtered something, and you could smoke them in public without feeling like you'd announced you were skint. They were never fashionable and never terrible, just solidly mediocre cigarettes that occupied that middle ground between poverty and pretension. Dorchester faded away in the 90s when the market polarised into cheap or premium, with nothing in between. They rank here because they represent that forgotten middle tier of British smoking. Not quite respectable, not quite rough, just somewhere in the middle trying their best. Club was king-size cigarettes before king-size became the standard, and smoking them made you feel like a sophisticated adult, even though they tasted basically the same as everything else. The packs were dark red with gold trim, trying to look upmarket while still being affordable for working blokes. Your dad might have switched to Club when he got promoted to foreman and wanted something that looked better when he pulled them out at the pub. They were smooth enough to chain smoke, strong enough to satisfy, and cheap enough that you didn't feel guilty buying 20 a day. Club disappeared when the tobacco industry consolidated and smaller brands got squeezed out, but they left behind memories of aspiration on a budget. They rank here because they represent that British compromise, wanting to move up without forgetting where you came from. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane and wondering what's coming next, hit that subscribe button now. Your favourite might be just around the corner. Player's number 6 was the slightly posher cousin of plain number 6, with the player's name giving it that heritage credibility that cheap cigarettes desperately needed. They were still working class cigarettes, but working class with history. Players had been around since Victorian times, and that mattered to blokes who cared about such things. The distinctive sailor logo on the pack connected you to British maritime history, even though you were probably smoking them in a council flat in Wolverhampton. The tobacco was decent, the draw was consistent, and at the price point they offered genuine value rather than just being cheap. Player's number 6 survived longer than most budget brands because of that heritage, but eventually even history can't save you from economics. They rank here because they proved you could have pride in smoking affordable cigarettes if they came with proper British provenance. Lambert and Butler became the working man's cigarette of choice in the 90s and 2000s, that perfect balance of affordable and acceptable that meant you could smoke them anywhere without judgment. The blue and gold packs were instantly recognisable, and every newsagent, every corner shop, every petrol station had them on the shelf. Blokes switched to Lambert and Butler when they wanted something better than budget brands, but couldn't justify premium prices, and they stayed with them because they were consistently decent. The tobacco was smooth enough for all-day smoking, strong enough to satisfy cravings, and familiar enough that you never had to think about what you were buying. L and B, as everyone called them, became so ubiquitous that they almost defined British smoking in the late 20th century. They rank here because they represent pragmatic British smoking. Not flash, not cheap, just reliable cigarettes for people who knew what they wanted. Rothmans was where you graduated to when you got your first proper job and could afford cigarettes that came in sophisticated blue and silver packs. They were marketed as international and premium, and smoking them meant you'd moved beyond working class brands into something more aspirational. The tobacco was noticeably smoother than Lambert and Butler, the filters were better quality, and the whole experience felt like you'd levelled up in life. Your dad probably switched to Rothmans when he made manager, and he'd feel slightly embarrassed if he ever had to buy Lambert and Butler again. Rothmans was proper middle-class smoking, not quite Marlboro money, but definitely beyond the factory floor. They rank here because they occupied that sweet spot of being genuinely better than cheaper cigarettes while still being within reach of ordinary blokes with decent jobs. Benson and Hedges Gold was sophisticated smoking for people who wanted everyone to know they could afford the good stuff. The distinctive gold packs were instantly recognisable, and the advertising was famously artistic and enigmatic. Just the gold pack in surreal situations, no health warnings or product information. Blokes who smoked B and H Gold had office jobs, company cars and expense accounts. The cigarettes themselves were mild and smooth, perfect for chain smoking through business meetings and long lunches. Your dad probably smoked them if he worked in insurance or sales, and he'd feel like he'd made it every time he opened a fresh pack. The gold pack became a status symbol in 80s Britain, visible proof you'd escaped the working class and entered the world of white collars and business cards. They rank here because they represented aspiration achieved. You smoked B&H Gold because you'd earned the right to. Silk Cut was marketed as the lighter alternative for people who wanted to pretend they were being health conscious while still smoking 20 a day. The purple packs with their distinctive ripped silk design were everywhere in the 80s and 90s, and the advertising campaign with torn purple silk was genuinely iconic. Women smoked Silk Cut because it seemed more elegant than Marlboro, and men smoked them because their wives or girlfriends had convinced them to switch to something less harsh. The tobacco was mild to the point of being almost insubstantial, which meant you'd smoke more of them to get the same satisfaction. But that was rather the point. You could smoke all day without the guilty feeling of heavy cigarettes. Silk Cut represented that very British approach to health concerns. Acknowledge the problem, but make only the smallest possible change. They rank here because they were genuinely popular, genuinely smooth, and genuinely convinced a generation of smokers they were making a sensible choice. Dunhill International was proper luxury smoking for people who wanted the best and could afford to pay for it. The red packs had that distinctive Dunhill name with all its associations of Mayfair tailors and gentlemen's clubs, and smoking them meant you'd arrived at a level where price wasn't the first consideration. The tobacco was rich and complex, Virginia leaf blended perfectly, and every cigarette burned evenly and tasted exactly as it should. Blokes who smoked Dunhill International were doctors, solicitors, senior managers, professional people who treat themselves to the best in everything. The only reason Dunhill doesn't rank higher is that it was almost too posh for its own good. Smoking them could seem pretentious unless you genuinely had the lifestyle to match. They rank here because they represented the absolute top tier of British smoking culture, where quality and heritage mattered more than price. Marlboro was American rebellion imported to Britain, and every teenager who wanted to feel like a cowboy or a rebel smoked them at some point. The iconic red and white packs with the Marlboro Man were everywhere, and they represented freedom, masculinity, and that American dream that British working class lads desperately wanted. The tobacco was strong, the flavour was distinctive, and smoking Marlboro meant you'd rejected British stuffiness for American cool. Your dad probably switched to Marlboro in the 70s when he grew his hair long and started listening to rock music, and he probably switched back to British brands when he got married and got sensible. Marlboro dominated global smoking for decades because they marketed a lifestyle, not just a cigarette. They rank this high because even though they're American, they became such a huge part of British smoking culture that ignoring them would be dishonest. Every British smoker has Marlboro memories, even if they ended up smoking something else. Embassy was the cigarette brand that defined British smoking for decades. Reliable, affordable, and so ubiquitous that saying 20 Embassy was basically automatic. The red packs were in every pub, every bookies, every working men's club from the 60s through to the 2000s. They sponsored snooker when snooker was massive on television, and every bloke watching at home probably had an Embassy between their fingers. The tobacco was decent quality without being flash, the price was reasonable without being cheap, and they were consistent in a way that made them the default choice for millions of British smokers. Embassy represented the absolute mainstream of British smoking. Not aspirational, not rough, just solid, dependable cigarettes that working people could afford to smoke every day. They rank here because they were part of the furniture of British life for so long that they transcended being just a cigarette brand and became a cultural institution. Senior Service was the cigarette that built the British Empire, or at least that's what the marketing suggested. They'd been around since 1880. They were unfiltered and strong, and they were what real men smoked when smoking meant something more than just nicotine addiction. Your granddad probably smoked Senior Service during the war, and he probably kept smoking them until they stopped making them in the 80s. The distinctive blue and white packs with the naval imagery connected every cigarette to Britain's maritime heritage, and smoking them meant you were part of that tradition even if you'd never seen the sea. Senior service represented British smoking at its most traditional and unapologetic. No filters, no concessions to health concerns, just strong tobacco for strong men. They ranked this high because they embodied an era of British smoking before anyone worried about the consequences. And there's something powerfully nostalgic about that, even if we know better now. Craven A was the gentleman's cigarette, advertised as made specially to prevent sore throats, which was obviously nonsense but sounded sophisticated enough that middle-class smokers believed it. They came in those distinctive red and white packs with cork tips that felt luxurious, and smoking them meant you had taste and discernment. Doctors smoked Craven A, teachers smoked them, bank managers smoked them, professional people who wanted quality without the flash of premium brands. The tobacco was genuinely smooth, the cork tips were genuinely pleasant, and the whole experience was miles above anything working-class smokers could afford. Craven A represented aspiration and class in British smoking. Not the highest tier, but definitely respectable. They rank here because they were genuinely excellent cigarettes that proved British tobacco companies could compete with anyone in the world when they tried, and because they represented an era when smoking was still socially acceptable among the professional classes. Players Navy Cut was the cigarette that generations of British working men smoked with genuine pride. The distinctive sailor logo, the naval heritage, the strong Virginia tobacco. Everything about Players said this was a proper British cigarette for proper British people. They'd been around since 1877. They'd been in every sailor's kit bag during both wars, and they represented British manufacturing excellence at its finest. The unfiltered versions were powerfully strong, but when they introduced filters in the 60s, they managed to keep that distinctive Players character that made them instantly recognisable. Your granddad smoked Players, his dad smoked them. And if you'd been around in the 50s, you'd have smoked them too, because that's what everyone smoked. They rank this high because they represent British smoking heritage at its absolute best. Quality tobacco, historic brand, and genuine pride in what you were smoking. Players wasn't just a cigarette, it was part of British identity. Woodbine was the cigarette that built Britain. Every soldier in the trenches smoked them. Every factory worker had a packet in their pocket. Every working man from Glasgow to Plymouth knew exactly what pass the Woodbines meant. They were small, unfiltered, incredibly strong, and so cheap that even the poorest bloke could afford a packet. The distinctive green packs with Wild Woodbine written across them were part of British visual culture for a century, and saying you smoked Woodbines meant you were working class and proud of it. Your great-granddad smoked them down the pit, your granddad smoked them on building sites, and by the time they stopped making them in the 80s, they'd become a symbol of British working-class resilience. Woodbine represents everything that was British about British smoking. Tough, unpretentious, affordable, and absolutely unapologetic. They rank second because they were more than just cigarettes. They were part of British social history, and every old bloke who remembers them will tell you nothing smoked today comes close to proper Woodbines. Capstan Full Strength was the finest cigarette ever made in Britain, and old smokers who remember them will tell you nothing. Not Marlboro, not Dunhill, not anything American or European, ever came close. They were made by Imperial Tobacco using the finest Virginia tobacco money could buy, medium-sized, unfiltered, and so perfectly blended that every cigarette tasted exactly as it should. The navy blue packs with the ship's Capstan logo represented British naval heritage and manufacturing excellence, and smoking Capstan meant you knew quality when you tasted it. They were more expensive than Woodbines or Players, but blokes who could afford them never smoked anything else, because why would you compromise when you could have perfection? Capstan Full Strength was what British tobacco companies produced when quality was the only consideration, when heritage and expertise mattered more than marketing and price points. They stopped making them in the 80s when the cigarette market changed and small batch quality couldn't compete with mass production. But every smoker of that generation will tell you the same thing. Capstan was the king, and nothing that came after ever matched it. They rank first because they represent British cigarette manufacturing at its absolute zenith. And if you never smoked one, you never really knew what British cigarettes could be. From Mayfair's harshness to Capstan's perfection, British cigarettes told the story of a nation through smoke and ash. If this brought back memories or made you curious, hit subscribe and watch the next video on screen where we rank something else from Britain's past. Cheers.